Now that felt nice, and that felt like it was a little bit slower, maybe a moderate action rod, and that felt like maybe a 10 weight power, and that felt like it loaded well with this 10 weight line, and that felt like it recovered quick, but not too quick. You guys see what I'm doing here? And maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not, but what is a 5 weight? What is a 5 weight line? These things don't actually exist. They're not defined anywhere objectively. The entire fly fishing industry is based on the subjective experience of industry professionals. So they roll the rod to somebody's specs, and that guy goes out and he tests it, and he says, this feels like a 5 weight. It feels like it's behaving like a 5 weight should. But you don't know that guy's casting style or casting experience or his fishing preference, or if he prefers fast action. And what is fast? Fast is only relative, right? It's faster than this rod, so that rod must be slow or moderate, and this rod must be fast. But typically we have all these charts and these graphs that say, you know, where the rod bends, or it's bending at the tip, therefore it's fast action and all this stuff, but there's no numbers. And so when you go to a shop and you pick up your new fast action 5 weight rod, what is a 5 weight doesn't exist. You don't know it's a 5 weight. There's no objective standard, there's no definition. And if you say, well, we have the AFTM chart, we have this line standard, so a 5 weight rod should feel good with that style of line. And if it feels good, therefore it's a 5 weight. But let's say what feels good. If you're a trout fisherman and you're casting 20 feet, that's a lot different than someone who's shooting line to distance and carrying a specific weight to load a rod. And then you might ask, what does it mean to have a loaded rod? And that's also not defined anywhere. So if you don't have what is a loaded rod defined, then you can't calculate what weight you need to load that rod. And then everything is based off of feel relative to other rods and other manufacturing and other casting styles and fishing disciplines. Well, luckily for you guys, there's actually a way to objectively measure this information. It was pioneered and developed by the late Dr. Bill Hanneman, and Bill developed something called the common sense system. And what I want to do is I want to introduce it to you as somebody who is just intrigued by this. Now, using Bill's system, we're going to be able to come up with 3 variables that objectively measure rod characteristics. The 3 of them are effective rod number, which is going to allow us to calculate specifically an ideal line weight to load a rod. We're going to define load, which is going to be deflecting the tip 1/3 of its length, which is pretty easy to do. Then we're going to put a bunch of weight on it to deflect that tip, and then we're going to be able to calculate the ideal grain weight for a line to get that performance out of a rod. So this is something you can do if you're struggling to pair lines with your rod. Super cool to be able to do that. Once it's deflected like that, obviously you can see the bend profile, but we're going to measure the deflection angle of the tip. That's going to give you action. Now, this is extremely useful because it tells you how weak the tip is. A fast rod has a weak tip. Weak tips are able to recover very quickly, and they generate higher line speed. They're casted with a tighter arc. So this gives you a bunch of useful information to how the rod's going to deflect, how tight your arc should be, how fast of a line speed you're going to kind of be able to generate in general. But the cool thing is people think that fiberglass is slow and that graphite's fast, and these are very general terms. But the truth is you can tool fiberglass as fast or faster than graphite. The material doesn't change the action profile at all. What it actually changes is the frequency, or how it feels, or how fast it's able to recover based on the stiffness and the weight of the material. So obviously fiberglass, which is typically lower modulus, if you're going to make it of equal stiffness, you're going to have to use more of it, so then it's going to be heavier, so it's going to recover slowly, but it can still be tapered the exact same or tapered more aggressively and have an even weaker, even faster tip. So this is crazy useful, because if you find a modern glass rod that claims to be this epic thing, but the tip of it is super weak, you're like, hey, that's not a streamer rod. that is not going to work for my casting style, even though you might think it's going to have the feel you want. It's not. So that's action angle. And then we're going to be able to look at the frequency. That's what you want for feel. When you're looking at glass, how fast does the glass recover? How fast does the graphite recover? What does this value mean subjectively as far as how a rod feels as it behaves? So we're going to be able to basically get three values. We're going to calculate the effective rod number, which is going to correlate to the exact weight line that you should put on it. The action angle, which is going to tell you essentially your casting stroke length and arcs and how weak the tip is, which you want a stiff tip, in my opinion, for streamer fishing. So we're having an objective numerical value for that, which is crazy cool and crazy useful, relative of the material composition of the rod. And then we're going to have the frequency, which is going to give you an idea of how soft it feels. Right, so if you have like a 6-weight fiberglass rod that you love, and you want that kind of slow bending arc casting style, and a 10-weight for pike and muskie fishing because you like to cast in that style, you can have a numerical value to objectively state the feel and the slowness of the recovery, which is crazy useful to have. So, three values. Let's get to work. We're going to compare and look at the Thomas Shank 10-weight. We don't know what a 10-weight is. We're going to figure it out. Thomas Shank 10-weight. It's an 8-foot, 10-inch, one-piece, moderate action, subjective, right? We don't know. I would say it recovers kind of, I don't know. You would say moderate action kind of implies both, but it doesn't. It's a slower recovery rod, a little bit more forgiving, more of an open stroke, super fun to cast. And it's my gold standard. I think that is the gold standard streamer taper. So we're going to figure all this out with one of the best fly rods in the industry. And you guys can do all this at home. I got a little bit of a fancy setup, but you can do all this at home. Let's get to work. Now, typically what you do to kind of like subjectively measure a rod in a shop, maybe they'll let you go out and cast it, which is super cool, but you'd essentially just whip that thing. A good hard snap. You're applying a certain amount of power, maybe like 80 or 90%. You're going to try to be consistent. You're going to see how much force it takes to deflect that tip. You're going to dampen the rod and see how fast it recovers. You'll be able to kind of get a feel for the bend and where it's bending and how fast or slow it is. But that's about it. That's about as useful as that gets right there. So you can tell the tip is pretty stiff. It's getting a mid-flex bend. It recovers pretty quick, but it's not like a super whippy rod. It's not a broomstick by any means, but that's about it. Now, check this out. So what you need is just something to keep your rod level. This is a pretty cool rod holder that I picked up from Mud Hole. It's the CRB product. And what you're looking to do, you're looking to get the blank of that rod perfectly level. Now, we need a few values to get started. We need the total length of the rod in inches. Now, it's an 8-foot, 10-inch rod. 8 times 12 plus 10. Bada bing. So it's a 106-inch rod. What we're going to do for load, what is a loaded rod? We're going to deflect this rod tip 1/3 of its length. That's what a loaded rod is going to be. So we're going to take this number and we're going to divide it by 3. So in order to calculate our ERN, our effective rod number, we're going to deflect the tip 35 inches. So we need to know where the tip is starting, which will be right there-ish. So we have 61 7/8. 61.875 minus 35.33. So we're going to deflect this tip down 35.33. The height we need to measure up to is going to be 26.545. 26.5. So where this system gets its name is we're going to use pennies, common cents, cents with a C, cents, common pennies. So go to the bank, get 3 or 4 rolls of pennies and count them out. But you want pennies minted after 1982 at least. There's a pretty big difference in the copper content before 82. The pennies tend to be really heavy. But after 1982, they tend to be about 38 grains a piece. So you can just kind of count them all out at the year. And I just have them in Ziploc bags. And we got a paper clip to hold them. So this will get us real quick. Here's a bag of 100. And then we'll go 125. Ooh, 26, we're pretty close. We need a few more. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this will be 135 pennies. I think we should back it off 1 or 2, 135. We'll go like 133-ish. 133 pennies is what it took. 133 pennies. Now we're going to take that number of pennies, we're going to multiply it by a constant, which Dr. Bill figured out. It's going to be 3.33. And then we're going to subtract 10 from this lovely duo. And that's going to give us the grain weight that should ideally load this rod. $430 grains. So the Rio outbound short and a 10 weight runs 425 grains. 425 grains. So what's really cool is I just got to within plus or minus 10 grains of one of my favorite fly lines in a 10 weight class for this rod. Do you like I was able to just take a rod, bend it to 1/3 the length, do just 3.33 minus 10, and I got within 10 grains of my favorite fly line on this rod, which is Rio's outbound short. Now, I also like lines that are slightly under that. Like I fished the Elite Predator, which runs 410 grains, but you can see how close this system is at generating the ideal fly line grain weight. So 432 grain rod. That's pretty cool. You guys are looking at my butt. Sorry about that. So I'm going to take just a piece of paper, put it behind the rod so I have kind of a nice clean background without trying to get the distance moved. Mark the tip. I'm going to just kind of back up, try to keep my head as level as possible, make sure those 2 dots are lined up about as good as I can. There's horizon. .65 on the dot. So my action angle is 65. Which you can just see in the bending profile. If I could get the protractor off the board, you can just see the way this is bent. This would be like a fast action rod. It's going to have a really weak tip. The angles are going to be like close to 70, 72, 71, something like that. As rods get, as the rod tip gets slower, it gets stronger. And the flexing starts to happen higher up in the blank, I guess farther back, deeper into the rod. You start to get mid-flex rods as you increase the strength of the tip. The action becomes slower because this stiff tip isn't going to be able to recover as fast as the whip crack of a really weak tip. It throws generally slower line speeds, still capable of really nice, tight, efficient loops, but not as tight, obviously. But they don't get overwhelmed and they don't flatten out when you put super heavy sinking lines on these guys. These guys do not tend to throw tailing loops. They're a very, very forgiving rod to throw for beginners, especially when you line them with 430 grains at 30 feet long, modern compact streamer heads. These tips don't give a crap. The bend happens deep into the blank, midsection, all the way into the butt. Beautiful feel and taper to this tip section. That action angle is everything for being able to diagnose a streamer rod. So the final step to this is called the common sense frequency, and this is probably the most subjective thing to try to measure, which is how does a rod feel? And kind of the way Bill describes it is how fast, or what the frequency is a rod recovering under load. But I don't care about the blank. I don't care about the unfinished blank. I care about the finished blank, because every single guide, every single piece of epoxy, every single thread wrap is going to increase the weight relative to the stiffness of the rod blank, which is going to change the frequency. So the finished product is what we have to measure, because you can get blanks measured from the factory at specific cycles per minute, but it's the finished rod that actually matters. So we're going to take the load that we generated, 432 grains, that's optimal for this rod. We're going to bind it to the rod's tip with a rubber band, and then we're going to oscillate it and measure how long does it take in seconds for it to create 20 cycles, and that's going to give us our cycles per minute, which we're going to have to do a little bit of math and get 1200. I'll show you where that comes from. But that'll give us an objective value for what a rod feels like subjectively. And this has to do a lot with the composition. Is it graphite? Is it low modulus graphite, high modulus graphite? Is it fiberglass? Is it low or high? Is it a composite? What are the guides? How do the guides and the weight of the guides and the number of coats of epoxy, how does that change the finished product to get the feel, the rate of recovery, how it responds in your hand? That's a hard thing to measure, but this is how you do it. So I need 432 grains. I just got a grain scale. I'm just going to take pennies and throw them on there until I hit 430-ish. 310. 426. And then I have these steel BBs for my kid's BB gun. 432. Is that what? 432. So there's our exact. Wait a minute. How heavy is a rubber band? 438. Let's take that BB off, because I'm going to use a rubber band to bind this to my rod tip. 433. So with the rubber band, that's pretty sick. Let's put all these pennies, empty bag. I'm going to take, all the air out of here, mash these guys together, and then I'm going to use a rubber band to put this on my rod's tip top so that it's loaded. I'm going to take my load right at the tip top and just bind it on there. And remember, I put the weight of the rubber band as part of the weight to get 432 grains. Let's make sure that's in frame. Yeah, pretty sweet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to oscillate this, hang on to it, bind it so it's really tight, and then I'm going to let this rod oscillate at its frequency against the weight of all of its components, all of the epoxy, and the weight of a fly line, which is going to scale it relative to power. If you try to do it without this, then obviously a 10 weight's going to have so much, it's going to be so much stiffer than a 6 weight, but that's because of the power. But when you load it relative to what it should be loaded with, you kind of scale down for that, and you can get a 6 weight rod and a 10 weight rod that have similar feels, similar casting arcs, similar action angles. They would feel similar, and we'll actually have a number to objectively look at that. I'm going to give the rod some load here and let it oscillate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I got 14 seconds again. So we did it twice. So if we take our 1200, we divide it by 14 seconds, we get a common sense frequency of 85, which I'll put up a scale here. You can see that's kind of like really fast glass, like really high modulus glass. I shouldn't have said fast, really high modulus glass, or kind of like mid-range graphite. Like that's mid-range graphite. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found this infinitely helpful. This is Dr. William Bill Hanneman. Hanneman, I said it wrong earlier, Hanneman's system using pennies to generate the exact grain window for your fly rod, the precise action angle, where the rod's bending, how strong the tip is, genuinely how large or how tight of a casting arc you're gonna have, and then the rate of recovery, the common sense frequency being 85, which is super cool because now you know intuitively what that rod feels like, which would be like really powerful fiberglass or kind of like low to mid-range graphite. It's very forgiving, fun to cast. You can play with it, long casting strokes, not a super tight stop point because you got a 65 action angle with a stiff tip that's going to be able to handle modern streamer lines, and you know exactly how heavy the streamer line should be to load it. Those are objective measurements for one of my all-time favorite fly rods and a 10 weight, whatever a 10 weight is. So use this system. Find this information. All of the articles by Bill are posted in Fly Rod Builder magazine. I'll put up a text that's more accurate than that. Educate yourselves. Hopefully this video got you through it enough. What is a loaded rod? You need the length. You need to deflect the tip 1/3 of the length. You're going to deflect the tip with pennies. You're going to count how many pennies. You're going to multiply by 3.33 minus 10. That's going to get you your grain window. You're going to create a horizon. You're going to measure a linear section of the rod tip to get your degrees using a, whatever these things are called. One of these things. So you know the degree of bend of rod tip, which is telling you how weak or stiff the rod tip is. Slow action rods have stiff, powerful tips. And then oscillate that rod under the load of the line, count the frequencies that it takes, 20 cycles, and how many seconds, 1200 divided by your seconds, common sense frequency for how a rod feels. Super cool stuff, super useful. I wish the industry, because this stuff has been around for like 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years. The industry wants nothing to do with this because then you can objectively compare fly rods and you could maybe choose not to spend $1,000 for a rod that does the exact same thing for $250. You would actually know. You would actually objectively be able to look at it and be like, wow, that's a lot of marketing BS. I don't need to spend $1,000 to get the exact same feel, performance, load, everything. Now, certainly there might be some minute things you can't account for. Obviously you're going to have preferences for guide style and grip and handle layout and length and fit and finish and made in America and whatever. But I plan to use this in every rod review going forward and starting to build kind of a database of gear for streamer specific applications, especially pike and muskie stuff, and that 10, 11, 12 light class, two-handers, all of it. And these are the numbers you're always going to see in every rod review so that it's no longer my subjective opinion on this is a moderate rod, this has a nice stiff tip, this is loading good with a 10 weight line from Rio, like whatever. You will also get my subjective opinion, but you'll be able to verify it and start to build your own database of what rods you like. And hopefully you have a one-piece chipstick because these things are fantastic. And now, like if you go watch that review and you see me say, hey, the two-piece and the four-piece are a little faster, the tip feels a little bit lighter, I can generate a little higher line speed, you would actually be able to know if this was like 68 or 69 instead of 65. I would be able to actually say, hey, I know this for a fact. It's not just something I feel. Ha! That's cool. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for watching. See ya.